So tier two, been running for 20 years. Certainly from the previous 10 years, we've been sort of gradually growing on a very consistent basis. And I think, sometimes you sort of feel that stars align. There are a number of acquisitions made in the technology space. IBM acquiring Red Hat is one example of that, and general increase in sort of interest from our services. And we just felt that, we should actually look into the market and see whether there was a way that, that we could grow faster. We were, privately held, organically growing business. We were doing fine. But what I wanted to do was to see if I could find an environment where, we could grow much, much faster. And it was very much that sort of proposition, if you like, that I spoke to, Gary initially about. We did speak to, a couple of other organizations as well before we made the choice. But I think there were a couple of things really that sort of drew me to, to the guys' adventure. One, of course, was the focus really around IT. And the other one was this sort of balance really between, I can use the term sort of, they're big enough and experienced enough to, to do what I needed to do, but they weren't so big that we weren't important to them. Some of the other organizations that we talked to, either they were one-man bands that we just didn't think they had the reach, or the larger, sort of business consultancy, acquisition type consultancies who just, truth be told, they didn't see us as anything other than, potential way to generate some revenue. They didn't take an interest in us. So, as I said, after I'd spoken to Gary, that was really the reason I wanted to take things forward with venture. I felt that I sort of wanted to work with an organization that had a sort of similar outlook and mentality to us. And what I mean by that is, tier two is not a big organization, but we're big enough, if you like, to actually deliver on pretty, good projects, but we're not so big that we don't care about smaller. So I wanted to be taken, I was going to say seriously, I don't really mean that. I wanted a sort of a bit of a personal touch, and I didn't want to be just boxed up, if you like, into this type of project or this type of company. So I think that, the level of interest that I think that sort of Gary and subsequently his team showed was very important. I mean, I think the other thing really was the approach that they took, and, they clearly showed that they wanted to have skin in the game. They did, a sort of a readiness type report, which they did free of charge, of course, which was, tremendously valuable. And then, of course, what that did was then move us into a slightly different type of situation where, there was another report, relatively cost effective for us, which is important for us, because what we didn't want to do was just have, a sort of a consultancy exercise going on for months when potentially there was going to be no outcome. And then part of the model is that it's contingency based. So, if we get a successful acquisition, then, Gary obviously and his team get paid. And if we don't, well, fine. So there's a risk element particularly for a small business like us as well. And I think that the business model that those guys have, fitted very well into what I was thinking. And I think they added value, across all of the stages. Clearly the contacts that they have, both in terms of refining, getting initial feedback on the possibility or the potential, if you like, was very, very important. But I think also, speaking, to a lot of the other contacts who, some of whom we actually had a conversation with, and sort of qualifying them in or out was absolutely key. In truth, if I hadn't used those guys, I wouldn't have known where to start. You'd be sitting waiting for someone to approach you. And that's a little bit of a lottery, isn't it? Somebody may, somebody not. And so that didn't really fit with my objective, which was to go out and say, I think there is an opportunity here for us the way the market is. So let's actually test that. So I think to give us that sort of proactivity, I think was very, very important. I think the other thing too, when you get down into the weeds of it, and particularly when you're right down into the weeds of the due diligence exercises and everything else, the endless amounts of number crunching and slicing data here, there, and producing projections and all of these sorts of good things. Again, Gary and Steve, fantastic in doing all of that. So that was really, really important too.